Good morning again, fellow ruminators. Thank you for joining another session. And it is indeed a pleasure to be one more time with you to discuss a very important topical issue. Now, I was reading the UK Guardian last night, and I came on a very interesting article. I came upon two, but I'll share one with you in this video, and I'll share another with you tomorrow. Well, we have been hearing recently that King Charles, as the king of the British monarchy, decided that he would be employing a homeopathic doctor to take care of him. Now, the UK government, they went on really a tirade, right, about homeopathic medicine and naturopathic medicine, alternative medicines, and all other types of medicine, except the allopathic medicine that the Western world is so much accustomed to and has adopted for so many decades right now. Now, allopathy, that is the standard medicine in the Western world, right? And many doctors think that the only way to healing their patients is through drugs, right? And we have learned on this channel that drugs do not cure, right? It might provide some, or they, I should say, they might provide some temporary, relief for a particular illness that you are suffering from, but it does not necessarily, or they do not cure your disease, right? They do not attack the root causes of the disease, all right? The healing is found in nature and in the God of nature. Now, remember now that God created nature and he has power over nature. But because he is the creator of nature, he has implanted in nature healing powers, the powers that we need, or the nutrients that our bodies need to heal. In addition to that, we need to also be obedient to the laws of nature, to the laws of health. And many of us, the truth be told, including myself, have not really studied the laws of health. I did break down to you in a previous video the 8 laws of health, right? And some of which include air, which is fresh air, right? Sunshine, right? Nutrition, that's proper nutrition, right? And we also have faith in God, right? All of these are amongst others that we have listed. You can go back to my video and you can look at the 8 laws of health, right? Many of you have not watched that video, but I think it's important for you to watch the video because, there are so many different things that we can use in nature, such as water. For example, a simple thing as water, there's so many different uses of water and how water can be a healing, a form of healing, can heal you through different therapies, through different water, what we call hydrotherapies, right? We also have the fact that you need to exercise, right? Lifestyle, right? You need to be able to be active. God made us to be active and we should not be inactive. A lot of times, one of the reasons why our bodies are not functioning the way how they ought is because we do not really exercise as we ought to, right? And if we are going to be honest with ourselves, we should say most of us do not exercise on a regular basis. It has to be consistent. It can't be just every Sunday or every, Friday. It has to be consistent and everyday activity because just one day without exercising can affect your health because that is how God made the body. He made the body to be able to move, right? And we have to go outside, work sometimes in the sunshine, do some gardening, right? Do some sweeping up, cleaning up of the yard, whatever you want to do some farming, right? So that you can maintain your health. One of the things that is interesting is how farmers, right? And some of these farmers that I grew up with in rural Jamaica, for example, and they were not necessarily eating in the best way, right? They had their yams and potatoes and their bananas and plantains and other things that they ate, right? And they lived very long, right? Some of them have lived up to 90 and above, 80 and above, because their bodies were always active. They were always doing something. They were always moving their limbs, And we need to understand that medications, going to a doctor because you have health insurance, there is this false security, right? Now, because we have health insurance, which is good, by the way, right? And you should try to get some health insurance. It can be very scary when you do not have one. However, we sometimes, the disadvantage to having a health insurance, that we depend on the medical facility, right? The medical infrastructure to take care of us. And we think that we ought not to take care of ourselves. And this is one of the reasons why we are having doctors, right? And the mainstream scientific community, having that inordinate influence over us. We ought to take back our health into our hands. Now, let's look at the Guardian newspaper to see what the Guardian newspaper was doing, because they were simply lambasting in a subtle way King Charles for his selection, for his choice of wanting to, desiring to have homeopathic remedies and treatments rather than sticking to the allopathic medicine form of treatment. Now, one of the things that is very important for you to also understand, because I'm not taking up for here and I'm not on any of them side, on any of either of the sides, right? Because we know that, King Charles was promoting, what, right? During the pandemic, right? And he was against all other types of medications or all other types of treatments. So they could also be playing a game here. However, it is his choice in a free society, in a democratic society, to choose whatever treatment that he deems best for his health. What we don't want Charles to do, as King Charles, is to be, playing the hypocrite by then afterwards promoting other drugs that he perhaps does not use. Because the article went into a historical, lesson about how the monarchy over the years, has been known, that's the British monarchy, has been known to, they side with, they tend to use traditional medicines, homeopathic medicines and naturopathic medications or treatments as their preferred medicine. So it is interesting that you would think that these people, of course, this is an ancient, monarchy, but the fact of the matter is that they have other modern things and they ascribe to other modern things like the internet, and they have all the technologies that you want to have, and the dressing, the forms of dressing and other things, but they've decided that they will stick with homeopathic and naturopathic remedies. And the question is why? Why is it that what do they know that many people do not know or prefer not to know? Because I would say they prefer, particularly in the Western world, that they prefer not to know, because as the Bible says that light is coming into the world, but men prefer darkness than light. You talk to people every day and you let them know that the medical establishment is rotten to the cure, and they still do not want to grasp it. They will tell you that this is not what their experience is, and at their hospitals things are different. And it might be so in terms of there are some doctors, because not all doctors are ascribing to the form of corruption. Not all doctors and administrators participate in moral and also in medical corruption. What we do know, however, is that the system is rotten to the core. Just like our political system is rotten to the core, you have a few politicians who, uphold the law, but that is not the standard. That is not the rule. And this is what you've got to understand. And the more you sit and argue, and when the system collapses, or when the system hurts you, injures you, because that's what has happened to many people during the pandemic, for example. You have Dr. John Campbell, who was promoting this medication. He kept on promoting it and telling people that they need it, right, until he was injured. And when he became injured, that was when his eyes were opened up. But there were other people, about three I knew, that went on his show, right, on John Campbell's, Dr. John Campbell's. And many of you know him, a brilliant nurse from the UK. And it was during that time, when he hosted these, these guests who were apparently injured by the medication, I should call it, and even then he kept on promoting it, having seen the potential correlation. We're not saying now that that medication caused their injuries, but before they were healthy people. So there has to be some sort of correlation between what happened and how they were, because they were healthy people before they took the medication, and all of a sudden they became disabled by the medication. Now, hear this journalist here. When I hear someone extolling the virtues of homeopathy, I am often reminded of a quotation from the TV show 30 Rock. There are many kinds of intelligence. And she said, practical, emotional, and then there is actual intelligence, which is what I'm talking about. So she's here inferring that people who desire to have alternative forms of medicines, right, are not as intelligent as we think. Now, similar, and perhaps correlating are the many kinds of medicine: natural, complementary, alternative, homeopathic, herbal, traditional. So she has listed the different forms. Here's what this author is saying. It is strange that homeopaths can still find employment in 2023. Now, what is she saying here? Is she suggesting here that that is a medicine or a form of treatment that is not good, and she does not subscribe to it, and it's okay for her not to subscribe to it? But then again, she is dictating that others who do subscribe to it are people who, they're practicing some form of quackery, right? And that they're idiotic, and that they are not as sophisticated and as intelligent, all right? They're not modern, in her words. They're backwards. And these are some of the words that we heard during the pandemic. In 1853, and she's now laying the historic foundation for of the British monarchy in as regards homeopathic medications, Queen Victoria's doctor was already calling the practice an outrage to human reason. In the following 170 years, it has been debunked repeatedly and comprehensively. After all, the principles run in complete opposition to science, based as they are on curing like with like. An extract of raw onion, say, to treat watery eyes, strengthening by process of dilution, and shaking it all up to promote quantum entanglement. Now, she is suggesting here, right, very, very interesting, that, the principles practiced in homeopathic remedies is in opposition to science, right? It's not science, according to her, right? And this is what we were faced with during over the last 3 or 4 years, right? Other forms of medications, other forms of treatment or therapies, okay, that did not, right, align with the mainstream medicine, with allopathic medicine. Well, I shouldn't even say allopathic medicine, I should say with mainstream medicine, because there were all types of allopathic remedies, that some doctors prescribed, and the mainstream medical infrastructure did not agree with them and also suppressed. All right. So if it's not coming from on high, from God on high, from the medical fraternity, it means therefore that it is not science. And this is what you've got to understand. Right? How can we be saying that? How did this author have the audacity, the temerity to say what she's saying here? I don't understand. But I understand that the Guardian newspaper, the UK Guardian newspaper, that is, that there are other Guardian newspapers, but the UK Guardian newspaper is controlled by Big Pharma and people like Bill Gates. Yet last week we heard that the head of the royal medical household is an advocate of homeopathy, right? So the head of the royal medical household, that is in Britain, right? So they've decided to treat King Charles and the British monarchy, probably the other members of the British monarchy, with the use of homeopathic remedies, not allopathic, right, medical treatment. So that is interesting, but it is good for us. It is not good for them. And don't be surprised if people like the Bill Gates and others of these global elites do the same. They might not be telling us what they're doing behind the scenes, but I would not be surprised if Gates, Bill Gates, and a lot of these doctors who are telling us what we should put into our bodies and not put into our bodies are also using alternative forms of medicines. And this is the hypocrisy of our societies. And we've got to understand that a lot of times, during the pandemic, for example, we were told that we should what? We should social distance or physical distance, whatever terminology you want to use, right? And we should stay at home. And we learned, I mean, from all over the world, that politicians, or I should say some of our politicians, that is, because we don't have evidence that all of them were doing that, but a number of them were caught, right? Participating in parties, and they weren't social distancing or physical distancing, as whatever terminology that is best suited. It doesn't make any sense, this social distancing and physical distancing over an airborne virus, right? It was just ridiculous. Now, Dr. Michael Dixon has championed such things as thought field therapy, as Christian healing, and an Indian herbal cure ultra diluted with alcohol, which claims to kill breast cancer cells. Methods like these might be unfashionable, he once wrote in an article and submitted to the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine, but they should not ignore. And that is okay. The fact of the matter is that once people are not taking poisons into their bodies, right, which unfortunately drugs are poisons, right? When we take drugs, irrespective of the drugs that you take, it does have side effects because it's not natural to the human body, right? And we need to understand that. Sometimes we might need them because we might be in severe pain, and that might, kill us, create some heart attack, and then you'll die. So sometimes, in order to preserve life, you have to use these allopathic forms of treatment. So we're not casting aspersions on allopathic medicine. What we are saying here on this channel is that people should have the right, the autonomy to choose which form of treatment they desire, and not having some people casting aspersions on these forms of their preferred choice. And this is what we're saying. So please do not think that we're trying to say that allopathic medication and remedies and forms of medicine, or form of medicine, I should say, is not efficacious. In some cases, it might be efficacious. I do not think, however, it should be the standard form of medicine, right? Because it is not natural, right? It uses too much chemicals, which is not good for our bodies. Homeopaths are fond of calling their ideas unfashionable, as by some inverse law of popularity, this makes them more likely to be correct. It's unfashionable, yes, because people don't use it. So that's why they call it unfashionable. But here she is giving some very important statistics. YouGov found in 2021, this is a website, and it says that half of Britons were open-minded about the practice, a figure that was slightly higher in the US and slightly lower in Australia and the Netherlands. In 2022, the global market for homeopathic products was valued at $11 billion. That's 8.6 billion pounds. So it means, therefore, that it is a big market. And why is it a big market? And why is it not so much popular in the United States, but it's popular in Great Britain? Well, the research has not been done to my knowledge, but I would here argue that it is because Big Pharma can, advertise its products on the mainstream media. In the British society, that is not possible. So that could be one of the reasons why, homeopathic medication or medical treatment is much more popular in countries like Great Britain, the Netherlands, and among other nations. Because the United States keeps on promoting these drugs to their populace, and their populace seems to be so much uneducated in terms of understanding the whole medical infrastructure. And that's what caused the response to the pandemic and what happened thereafter. So many US citizens died because if they had decided in many cases to take their own health into their own hands, I think some of those deaths could have been prevented. And if they had the tools, to treat themselves, then some of those deaths could have been prevented. But we tend to want to rely upon the system, the medical system, as if it is Big Daddy. And we have to listen to what Big Daddy tells us to do. Now, why is homeopathy so useless and yet so prevalent? She's asking that question. Part of the explanation must be that it has always found champions in elite circles. In the mid-19th century, dozens of homeopaths served as personal physicians to monarchs around the world, including the British monarchy, which is including Britain, where the first royal homeopathic doctor was a son of the Duchess of Devonshire, Edward, Prince of Wales. And she goes on and she goes on. Now, the royals are no longer the fashion influence they once were, but another bunch of homeopath advocating elites have risen to take their place. The celebrities such as Helena Bonham Carter, David Beckham, Jude Law, and she went into all these celebrities who decided that their preferred choice of medicine is homeopathic medication or medicine. And that is something interesting, because while sometimes some of these very same elites will tell you, will promote, if they have to, if they're given the opportunity, will promote other allopathic medication and other forms of, mainstream medical cure or treatments. They do not take them, right? And they will laugh at other people who take them when behind the scenes they're taking them. So let's give, kudos to Charles and these other what you call them, rock stars, or celebrities, as some people say, for telling us that this is the type of medication that they use, right? Because they are definitely, exposing, they are unveiling the hypocrisy in the entire medical establishment, right? But why, the question is being asked. These are not people who want for education, and nor are those who follow their advice. The typical user of homeopathy is affluent and middle class, while kings, movie stars, and the rich so susceptible to the snake oil. So snake oil refers to what? Allopathic medication, allopathic remedies, right? It's not the V that was snake oil, because that's what I thought, that the V that they used some years ago is snake oil, right? It is not what they say that it is. Two factors, he said, I think are at play. The first is that the elites tend to overestimate the value of their instincts. So they're not very educated, right? They're, as well, as far as medicine is concerned, right? They're educated in other aspects, whether in sports or in, the arts, in literature, and other forms of other branches of knowledge and learning, right? They're smart there. But when it comes to science, you have to leave that up to the allopathic mainstream medical establishment, right? You cannot think for yourselves. You don't have that sophistication to do that, right? You're not an epidemiologist, right? Or a virologist. And these are, titles that people were hurling at people. Oh, you're not one. I don't have to be one. Well, all I have to have is to have a brain. I don't even have to call the words that you are pronouncing, right? Because isn't it amazing that the medical profession, which prides itself as being very enlightened, that is the Western medicine, continues to have most of their words in Latin. Latin is a dead language, right? Latin is no longer spoken in any part of the world, right? Other than it's written, right? But the fact of the matter, if you want your citizens to be educated, wouldn't you decide to have the words written in the language of the people? Why do they still rely on Latin? Remember that the Roman Catholic Church did that during the medieval history, during the medieval era, right? That's what they did. They had the Bible written in Latin, not the language of the common man. And that was one of the planks of the Protestant Reformation, in which you have people like Martin Luther, who decided that he would write the Bible, translate the Bible in the language of the people, so that they can read it and understand it in their own language. But what we have in modern medicine, even today, is a sort of medieval medicine in which they give us these, fanciful words, I should say, right? In Latin, as if we should understand what they want to communicate, right? But if they were well-intentioned, I think what they should do, as people in the religious realm did during the Protestant Reformation, is to translate these words into the language of the common man so that he can understand and he can be educated as to what is going into his body, because that is what we call informed consent, which I don't think has ever happened in Western society. We tend to think that that is so. That is one of the requirements of modern medicine in the Western world, that we should have informed consent. But I dare challenge anyone that most of the times we've never had informed consent as they have themselves recommended. King Charles and Sidney Crawford spend their time surrounded by suckers. They are themselves exceptions to the rules that govern others. If a gut feeling leads them to thought field therapy rather than modern medicine, they might be more inclined to believe it. So there are people who practice, alternative forms of medicine, right? Are instinctual. They use their instincts. They're not human beings. They're not rational human beings. They're not scientific in orientation, right? They are stupids, right? And this is what she is implying. Now, this is written in 2023, right? And it's a very recent article, probably published 2 days ago, right? And this is the sort of thinking. She herself, obviously, is just parroting what she has been told to parrot, right? But the fact of the matter, she doesn't understand the history of modern medicine. Had she read it, had she been sophisticated enough, she would not have been articulating what she's doing. But we understand that she's being paid to do that. No wonder some people call it the prostitute, right? That the press is prostituting themselves. So there are some people who have come up with that, title, the prostitute. And the second is something first observed by Charles Percy Snow in his famous remarks about the two cultures in the West. Ignorance of literature and the arts would exclude you from highly educated circles, but it is perfectly acceptable to have no grasp of basic science, right? So people who practice homeopathic medicine has no basic grasp of science, right? And that's what people were telling me also during the pandemic. Andrew, you don't understand science, don't I? Do you? Right? Do you understand what science is all about? Have you studied the history of Western medicine? Do you think Western medicine is, this righteous, you know, uh, form of treatment, right? Do you think that it has no flaws, right? Which I think many people do think that modern medicine is God himself, right? It is so rational in thought that it cannot be gainsaid, right? There cannot be anything counter to modern medicine. That, to me, is a form of totalitarianism, right? It cannot be democratic in orientation. So alternative medicine is useless, but not always harmless when cancer patients put their faith in tinctures, and chanting can cause fatal delays to proper treatment. So this is what I just wanted to bring to your attention. So the mainstream media is on board with Big Pharma, and you need to understand that all our Western institutions have been co-opted, right? They have been taken over by these large corporate entities and donors. And it is for you to understand that and to come to an understanding and awareness that you need to take back your health. And you need to understand that your health is important, and that healing is not found in these drugs, right? But is found in nature and in nature's God. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to seeing you in our next chat.